Welcome back to the channel and to level 4 of the Financial Sacrifices series. Let's get right into it. Alright, in levels 1 through 3, which I've linked in the description below, we discuss cutting back on excess spending, maximizing your utility value, and reducing non-value added expenses. So in this episode, we're going to discuss the final steps that can save you money in your current financial situation before you have to make some pretty major lifestyle changes. What I also want to note is that in the intro video at the very start of the series, I said that these are going to get progressively more challenging and progressively more impactful for a smaller and smaller piece of savings. So just keep that in mind. Is that the savings numbers here aren't going to be as high as the prior episodes, and this is going to be harder to do on a day-to-day basis. And with that, level 4 of Financial Sacrifices is about rationing and cost per use. Okay, a little bit of a jump here. This is me while editing the footage. I didn't like how I initially explained it, so when I was editing, I went back and decided to refilm this part. So that's why I'm looking a little bit different right here. But let's jump right back into it, and let's start by defining what rationing is. So rationing is basically like budgeting, but with a physical object. For example, when you budget something, you have a set amount of money and it has to last you a certain amount of time. But when you're rationing, you're basically doing the same thing, but instead of using money, you're using something that you've already bought, but that still has some value because obviously you had to pay for it. Let me give you the best and also most generic example that I can, okay? Let's say you fill up the gas tank in your car, you only get paid once a week, and you need that gas tank to last until your next paycheck, which is Friday. So what you might do is you might change your driving habits and you might not go as many places so that you don't have to fill up again, so that you can still get to work, still get the things that you need to get done, but in a way that you don't have to fill up your gas tank 1 or 2 more times because you might not have the money for it. So in that case, rationing is what you're doing. You have a set amount of something that you already bought that has value to replace, and you're making it last a certain amount of time, which means you can only use so much of it within a certain time limit. The reason this matters from a budgeting perspective is a lot of people, the second it's no longer physically money, they forget that it has value and that it costs money to replace. Let me get one example real quick. Okay, so this is a bunch of seltzer water. I got that just because it's what I had kicking around, but it could be soda, it could be juice, it could be milk, whatever you like to drink. It's the same concept, right? Let's say that's $5 for that 12-pack. If you're someone who isn't budget conscious and rationing isn't really front of mind, you've never thought about this, you've never needed to, every time you're thirsty, you might just go grab another soda and then go grab another one and go grab another one. But by the end of the day, you finished the entire 12-pack and that 12-pack costs $5. And you just go and you buy another one, or you have a stockpile of them, so you just open the next one and you keep going. If you consistently do this, you're not pacing yourself, you're not stopping yourself, you're just thirsty, so you keep getting another, assuming you spend an average of $5 a day, that's $1,825 a year that you would spend on only that one drink. By comparison, let's put in a little bit of limitations using rationing. So instead of just drinking constantly and burning through as much as I feel like all the time, now let's say, okay, I have to have this last at least a week, or I can't buy more within that week so that once I run out, I'm out. As for how you address that with rationing, there's 2 ways to approach it. Option 1 is you drink it at the same pace you did before. You drink it as much and as often as you want, but then now that you're out, you do not buy another one until the next week happens. So if you drink all 12 of them in the first day, the next 6 days, you have to restrict yourself to tap water. That's all you got left. You're not allowed to buy another one. Option 2 is just be a little bit more conscientious of how much you're consuming. So a 12-pack is not an even number when you're looking at it on a 1-week scale, but let's say you have a 12-pack and you want it to last almost a week. Let's go with 6 days. That means you have about 2 drinks per day and it'll last you the majority of the week. Basically, you're just pacing yourself. You're being conscientious of how much you consume. You're being conscientious of how that is spread out over time. And as a result of that, the money that you spent on that is not changed. You spent the same amount of money, but it lasts you longer as a product, and inherently the money that you spent on it is going to last longer as well. So that's really what you're doing here is you've already converted your money into a physical object. Now you're pacing yourself with whatever that product is to make your money go longer by making that product last longer. Let's go back to me in a chair. I'll give you a couple more examples and then we'll move on to the second part. Let's jump immediately into some examples here. The first one I want to use is dish soap. Let's say I'm washing a dish. It can be a plate, a cup, a bowl, container, whatever it happens to be. Give or take, this is roughly how much dish soap you need to properly clean and sanitize a dish of roughly this size. Now obviously there's some variables here, right? If you have a more greasy or a more dirty dish to begin with, that might take more. If you have a different mineral content in your water, that could affect it as well. There's a few other factors that play in here, but the grand scheme of things, it doesn't take a substantial amount to physically clean the dishes. Now let's go to the second part of this example. I have the same dish. It is equally as dirty as it was before. All the water and mineral content that I'm using is going to be the exact same, but instead of using this much dish soap, I decide to use this much. Or this much. Let's say I used, I don't know, just tell me when to stop. Now let's go back for a sec and consider the lessons that we learned at levels 2 and 3 here, okay? So those are utility value and non-value added expenses. So in the two examples I just gave of how much soap you could use to clean a dish, the utility in both of those cases is that the plate gets cleaned and the bacteria are killed. That's the utility portion. The initial amount of soap that we put on there gets 100% of that utility portion done. So at that point, after you have enough to physically clean the dish, all the additional soap you added is non-value added because it doesn't get more clean at that point. So looking at it another way, right, that doesn't add any more utility because the plate is already cleaned by that smaller amount, but it does cost you more money because you have to pay for the soap. So that becomes 100% waste, and all that additional soap you're using is directly a non-value added expense and 100% money wasted. Let's be real here, the example I gave was a pretty apparent exaggeration, and like I said, sometimes the dishes are more or less dirty, you have different mineral content in your water, there's other factors that play into it, so I'm not saying you shouldn't use any soap at all. There's times that you will need more to remove additional grease, do stuff like that. That is one thing, but like I've tried to show in every level of this series, these small little savings on the day-to-day and the week-to-week can slowly snowball and add up to a substantial amount over time. If you excessively overuse things like this, you are almost literally pouring your money directly down the drain. Let's go through a couple examples with numbers, and all the examples in this video, I'm just using nice round even numbers. They're not like the actual cost and usage of everything, but it should just give you a ballpark of what we're going through here, okay? So let's say you cut the amount of soap that you use in half. You don't go 100% down, you literally just use half of that excessive amount. So let's say that saves you, I don't know, $50 per year in soap, which is an absurd amount of soap. Again, not a realistic number. We're just using even numbers here. But let's say you do that same thing on the other things you consume. So like your shampoo or your conditioner, the soap that you leave in the shower, or if you use body wash instead. Maybe if you use a ton of hair gel or hair products, something like that. If you start cutting back in only one place, the savings are going to be relatively small. But when you start doing this time after time with everything that you're consuming, slowly the savings start to add up and become a noticeable amount. And if that's the difference of whether or not you can actually get by, that might be something that you need to consider doing. Now, to be clear, personal hygiene is also very important, right? The health benefits alone are huge, and you will easily spend way more than what you save in medical bills if you have terrible personal hygiene. Do not use this video as an excuse to stop showering. That is absolutely disgusting and absurd. I'm not telling you to do that. But within reason, don't be afraid to ration the things that you have and that you use. So for example, if you have a bar of soap and you leave it sitting under the running water and it's just eroding it constantly, you might erode half the bar before you use the other half. If you are a more wasteful or less conscientious person, doing things like this is a good way to start cutting back and getting rid of some of these smaller expenses as well. And that's kind of why rationing can be a helpful tool, right? Is you have the same size bottle, but if you're using less every time that you use it, suddenly that same size bottle gets you more and more uses. And like I said, it makes the bottle last longer. And then because of that, the money you paid for the bottle lasts longer as well. And with that, let's move on to the second part of this lesson. And this might sound absolutely absurd. It actually sounds absurd saying it out loud to myself, but that's making sure you also maximize the longevity of whatever you're buying or purchasing by actually using all of what you paid for. Now, there's two ways to look at this. The first way, and this should be pretty obvious, is make sure you actually use all of the things that are within a container before you get rid of it. Let's jump to an example here using a tube of toothpaste. Years ago, I was dating a girl who knew I was very budget conscious and that I was really struggling to get by at that time, but she was still, I'll just say, excessively wasteful. So when a tube of toothpaste got to roughly this point here, she would immediately throw out the tube of toothpaste at that point because for her it was too inconvenient to try to press any of it out because she couldn't just like monkey fist the thing to get any more out at the end. So what I did as an experiment, which was good from a financial perspective but terrible from a relationship perspective, is I had her tell me when she thought a tube of toothpaste was empty but not throw it out. So what I did is see how long that quote-unquote empty tube of toothpaste lasted me brushing my teeth the same amount of times using the same amount of toothpaste that I normally use and just seeing how long it would last. Now for everyone who doesn't know me personally, which is pretty much everyone on the internet save for like 6 of you, I am really particular about dental hygiene. I have never had a cavity in my entire life. I brush a minimum of 2 to 3 times per day. So even brushing that amount with this quote-unquote empty thing of toothpaste, it lasted a little bit over 3 weeks from the point she said it was empty to the point that it was actually empty and I could no longer use it. Just to get some nice even numbers for the example here, let's say that it lasted me an extra month. Let's say a tube of toothpaste costs $4 on average and that it typically lasts 4 months on average. So if it normally lasts 4 months and you throw it out at the 3-month mark when there's 1 month of use left, that means you cut off 25% of its total use or its total life, which means you are also wasting 25% of the money that you spent on that tube of toothpaste. So in this case, that's only $1 of the purchase, but let's extrapolate this to your entire grocery bill. So looking at the 2020 figures from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in the US, the average annual cost of groceries is $4,942 per household. That number's probably gone up in the last couple of years due to inflation in the economy, but let's say if you waste 25% of your total groceries in the same way that you waste 25% of the roll of toothpaste, that means you would lose $1,235.50 per year based on that 2020 data. So again, if you wasted 25% modern day, that number is probably even higher. And if you're sitting there at home watching this, you might be thinking to yourself, I'm not that wasteful. I don't waste $1,200 a year of stuff. But the reality is when you break it down to a smaller time frame, that translates to just $23.76 per week or $3.39 per day of everything you use or purchase combined. So again, how to be less wasteful to save a little bit more money? Do the basic things to cut back. So that's why I started with this really easy example, right? Squeeze out all of the toothpaste at the bottom of the tube. It's really not that difficult. Another example that you might not think of is emptying something like a shampoo bottle or a conditioner bottle completely. So for example, my shampoo and conditioner have a pump on the top, but typically that draws from only one place within the bottle, so it stops pumping at one point. But if you take off the cap to the bottle, you'll see there's still a ton in there. The problem is it's not all compiled to the point that the pump is picking it up. Like I said, it sounds completely ridiculous when you first say it out loud, but making sure that you fully empty the containers of the tubes and that you fully use everything you paid for, that's a really simple way to make the things you already paid for last longer and to get more out of your money as a result. The second example is about maximizing longevity. And again, this sounds obvious at first, but it's something that you have to actively keep in mind to make sure you're not doing it. And that is, don't buy something if you're not going to use it before it expires. So for example, let's say you are a big milk drinker. You go through 1 gallon per week. Each gallon costs $4, but every single week you buy 2 gallons of milk, and then one of those 2 gallons expires at the end of the week. So if that happens to you week after week after week, and every week you buy 2, but then one of them expires before you're able to drink it, that means you're wasting 50% of the money, or $4, that you spent on milk, which means you are literally losing your milk money. I did not plan for that to be such a terrible dad joke when I wrote this script, but I guess it's fitting for the channel, so let's just roll with it. Anyhow, let's go to another example of this. Let's say you're a soda drinker, and then based on the previous levels, you looked at the unit price and you found out that the 2-liter bottle is less expensive from a unit price perspective than the 12-pack of cans. But let's also say that you don't drink soda super often. So what you find is that most of that 2-liter bottle consistently goes flat before you finish it. It doesn't taste good anymore, and then you end up pouring a good portion of it out. So in that case, it's still expired, not because it hit the expiration date, but because you can no longer consume it and it's no longer enjoyable to drink, it is expired in that way. It's the same thing of like if you open a bag of chips, you don't get through the whole thing, it's been sitting for a while and the rest go really stale. They might not technically be expired based on the expiration date that's printed, but you sure don't want to eat those because they're going to be pretty gross at that point. So when you're going grocery shopping, when you're doing things like this, I know I said to look at the unit price in the other video and to buy things based on the best unit price, but if you're not actually going to consume the entire thing and the bag or the box or the container or whatever it is that you're getting is physically too large for you to actually consume it all before it goes bad, in that case you have to factor that into the unit cost. So for example, if I buy a pound of pretzels and it costs me $4, or I can get 2 pounds of pretzels and it's $6, the unit price for the single pound of pretzels is $4 a pound, and if I get the 2 pounds of pretzels, it's $3 per pound. So you might say, okay, that's cheaper, but 2 pounds of pretzels is a lot. So let's say it goes stale after you consumed 1.5 pounds, so there's a half pound left over. If you adjust the unit price for how much you actually consumed, it's now $6 divided by 1.5 pounds, and you'll find that the unit price isn't any better than if you bought the smaller bag. But in that case, if you bought the smaller bag, the pretzels would always be fresh and you'd be more likely to eat them as well. So again, even if the unit price looks like it's better up front, if you're not consuming 100% of it, you have to factor that in because it might not be the best deal for you in your situation. Now let's move on to the second part of this level, which is cost per use. So this is again going to be exactly what it sounds like. It ties in closely with utility value, and then you'll also see a touch of non-value added here. Cost per use is what is the cost per time that you use an item. So what is the total cost of the item divided by the number of times that you use it. Let's jump directly into an example and go back to the tube of toothpaste. If I have a tube of toothpaste that lasts exactly 4 months, let's say there's 30 days per month and I brush 2 times per day, that means we will get 240 uses from that tube of toothpaste, assuming of course it lasts exactly that long. So if you wanted to calculate the cost per use, how much does it cost you every single time you brush your teeth? Let's say again that the tube of toothpaste costs $4, you divide that by the 240 uses, that would mean we use 1.67 cents or 1 2/3 of a penny every time we brush our teeth just in toothpaste. But using that same example from before where somebody throws out that toothpaste at the 3-month mark, now we have to recalculate it because we only get 180 uses, which is 25% less. If you recalculate the cost per use based on the reduced number of uses and the same price of the tube of toothpaste, now your cost per use goes up to 2.22 cents per use, which is a 1/3 price increase, a 33.3% price increase simply because you are using it less. So on one hand, right, this is literally pennies per use for toothpaste. So this is not a really high dollar example. So let's go to something else here. Back in the level 1 video, I discussed somebody who bought a lot of clothes. They were a shopaholic, but they had a room that was filled with clothes that they never wore. One of these bags of clothes alone cost $400, and again, they never wore a single one. So that means their cost was $400 and their usage was 0. Now my mathematicians out there will know that you can't divide by 0, but as you approach dividing by 0 from the positive side, which we're doing here, that number goes towards infinity. That means because they never wore these things, their estimated cost per use was infinite dollars. Infinite. That's more than Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Bill Gates combined. Now let's do another numbers example using clothing, okay? Let's say I buy a sweatshirt for $100, which in my mind is a lot of money to spend on a sweatshirt, but let's say I absolutely love this sweatshirt. It's great quality, it's super comfortable, I wear it all the time. So let's say I use it 3 times per week on average, and then I wear it every week for 2 years straight. That means I will have used it 312 times or 312 days, and calculating the cost per use based on those numbers, it cost me just over 32 cents per time I wore it. So it's 32.05 cents per day that I wore that sweatshirt. Now let's say by comparison I bought a second sweatshirt and it's only $50 for that sweatshirt, but the materials aren't as good, the quality isn't as good, and I don't enjoy it as much. So because I don't like it as much, it's not as comfortable, let's say I only wear it twice per week, and then because it's not as durable, it's not as high quality, it rips after 1 year and I decide it's no longer worth repairing. Because I only used it for 1 year and I didn't use it as often within that time span, I only used it 104 times. Calculating cost cost per use here, it's a little bit over 48 cents per day. It's 48.08 cents. Even though the initial purchase price for the second sweatshirt was half of the price of the initial one that I described, the cost per use is still 16 cents higher, which is roughly 50% more per use relative to the first sweatshirt because I'm not using it as often and it doesn't last as long. So basically, each time you use it is more expensive, even though it seems like it's less money up front. Now let's go into a final example. In the level 2 video, I talked about repairing your own house or repairing your own vehicles and basically fixing things on your own to save money. Here's a very real example that I've hit routinely when working on cars. A lot of vehicles have specialty tools that are specific to one car or one brand or a single job, and you need the tool to do only that job, and you don't need to do that job super often. So as part of evaluating whether or not it's worth repairing and fixing on your own, you should also factor in how many times you will realistically use that tool to determine whether or not it is worth the price. So for example, I have repaired brake lines on a car, but to repair brake lines, it's miserable. If you're just getting into cars, do not start with that. It is probably one of the least fun things I have ever done. You also need some specialty tools to be able to do it. So basically you have to have some tools that bend the brake line to the correct shape. You need some tools to cut them at the right length. And then there's some tools to basically form the ends so that you can physically connect them together and so they hold pressure. I live in an area that uses a ridiculous amount of salt on all the roads. Rust is a very real problem here. Even so, you replace brake lines maybe once every 15 to 20 years in the worst case scenario. So the reality is, for most people, you're not going to use the tool set more than once or twice in your life, because realistically at that point you're going to say, I never want to do this again, and you're just going to pay somebody else to do it. But going into some numbers examples here, let's say a mechanic gives me a quote for $500 to replace some brake lines. That's a little bit less than what I think they would actually charge, but it's a nice even number for the example. But let's say I decide to do this myself. It cost me $150 for parts and materials to do the repair. That means I have $350 left over to spend on tools before the break-even point versus what the mechanic would have charged. There's a couple different brands and types of tools you can get for that. So you can get a very basic set that's a little frustrating to use or maybe doesn't have the best quality, or you can get a really nice set. It might make the job easier, it might make it go a little faster, and it'll probably last forever, and it even might save you some time in the process. But the reality is, unless you're a professional mechanic, you're probably not going to be replacing brake lines that often. Now, if I were to get the most basic tools possible, that would be about $70 with everything I need. These are basically like your sets from Amazon or Harbor Freight that are gonna probably break after one use, but they will get the job done. But on the other hand, you could easily spend $350 on some professional grade tools. They are going to be top quality, they're gonna last you forever, and they'll be a lot less frustrating to use. But like I said, this series is about making the hard choices and being honest with yourself. If you're not going to use them, is it really worth the extra money that you spend on them? And if you are in the unfortunate situation where you do need these again, that means you had to store them and keep them somewhere and make sure they don't rust out while they're sitting there for the entire time until that time comes where you need them. So going into the numbers and the cost per use here, if you do everything right and everything goes as planned, you'll never need those tools again. So your use is only one time. You will get one use out of them because hopefully you will never have to do brake lines a second time. So if you get the set that's $70, you use it once, that's $70 per use. Even if you get the other set that's $350 and it's nice and it's gonna last forever, it doesn't matter if you only use it one time because your cost per use is still gonna be $350. If you're only worried about the financial aspect, that means the cost per use is 5 times higher on those professional grade tools. If you're concerned about other factors as well, such as like ease of use or time savings, that's something you can factor in based on your financial situation. But at least for my situation, back when I was doing the brake line repair, spending the extra $300 for tools that I realistically would never use again, that was not worth it considering it only took me an extra, let's say, an hour to an hour and a half versus what I would have saved using the more expensive tools. Again, your cost savings versus the additional time, that means you're basically getting paid $150 per hour for those 2 hours extra it takes you. Now, those are just some easy examples that I have actually gone through, but if you're looking to save money, what you really need to do is look at everything in this same light and try to decrease your cost per use as much as you can in as many places as you can. And the way to do that's relatively simple. You either have to decrease the cost or increase the number of uses. So don't spend a ton of money on something if you're only going to use it for a couple of times. And on the other hand, just because something appears to be cheaper up front doesn't mean it's the best value for you or the cheapest cost per use for you, because if it's something that you use extremely often and then you wear through it and then you have to replace it and constantly buy new ones, getting something that's higher quality but a little bit more expensive up front could make it a lower cost per use long term, because the increase in the number of uses is going to far outweigh the cost increase between the other one you're considering. And going along that same thread, and again, this should seem pretty obvious, take care of the things that you already have so that they last longer. Maintain the things that you own. For example, change the engine oil in your car. It is a lot less expensive than having to replace the engine. If you're gonna go out and do something like construction or yard work, maybe don't wear the most expensive pair of pants you own. I think a lot of this stuff should be pretty obvious, but you'll be amazed at how many people just aren't actively thinking about this, do something stupid, and then realize they've wasted a lot of money. But with that said, congratulations, because you have now made it through level 4 of the Financial Sacrifices series. Like we covered today, rationing is a great way to realize ways that you might have been wasteful that you hadn't considered previously, and then cost per use is almost always going to be the best way to evaluate what the best option is for you and what is the best value for you as a consumer. If you found this information helpful at all, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, or sharing this with someone you know. All of these help the channel grow, and it increases the likelihood that YouTube shows this to other people, thereby helping other people as well. I will link the next one in the series right here for you, but that'll do it for this episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.